Alright, so we're asked to find the inverse of this quadratic equation and then write its domain and range. So let's start by taking out f of x and writing it as y to keep it simple. And we're going to rewrite everything on the right side. So negative x plus 1 squared plus 2. Let's start by getting rid of the constant on the right side. So we'll subtract 2, cancel that out, and do the same thing on the other side. And that gives us y minus 2 equal to negative x plus 1 squared. And before we get rid of anything inside the parentheses, we have to get rid of the squared. So we take the square root of both sides, and that leaves us y minus 2, the square root of that. And on the right side, since we took the square root of the stuff in parentheses squared, we're just left with negative x plus 1. So now let's subtract 1 and subtract 1 from the right side. And it's important to know that you can't just take negative 2 minus 1, because this is inside the square root and this is going to go outside of the square root. So we're going to rewrite the left side as y minus 2 and then minus 1 on the outside equal to negative x. And so to find the inverse, we don't want to just have a negative. We want to leave only the x on the other side. In order to do that, we can think of this as multiplying the right side by negative 1, which is going to cancel out the negative. And we got to do the same thing on the other side, multiply everything by negative 1. And what that does is it changes the signs of everything on the other side. So on the right, you have just x left. And on the left, your first term, which is the square root of y minus 2, becomes negative y minus 2, because this negative distributes to the stuff inside, to the square root. And then negative 1 times the negative 1 becomes plus 1. So then we can write our answer as f inverse of x is equal to negative square root of y minus 2 plus 1. So now we are looking at writing the domain and the range of this equation. If you recall, the square root, one more thing we almost forgot, is that y goes back to an x. And then if you recall, the square root of x has this kind of shape, unless you're moving it right or left or up and down. So remember that the minus 2 takes this shape, moves it to the right 2, and the plus 1 moves it up one space. And then we also got to make sure we take into account the negative. Remember that the negative flips this whole thing over the x-axis, or over itself. So this new line, if we want to picture it, is going to move to the right 2, up 1, and it's going to be flipped over. So it's going to do something like this. So now that we can see that, we can write its domain and range. So the domain is going to be 2 to infinity, since it keeps moving to the right. And then the range, its low point, it keeps moving down. So that's going to be a parenthesis, not a bracket. And then it gets to a high point right there, and the high point is positive 1. So that's going to be the domain and range of the inverse.